Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Around the Water Cooler with NeDNR. Today it's me, Dehvynne, and
Alexa, hello.
hi Alexa, and today we have Jim Williams, and he's going to talk about NeRAIN today. The Nebraska Rainfall Assessment and Information Network, or NeRAIN, is a program designated to get citizens involved with monitoring weather across the state. The network consists of several hundred volunteers that spend a few minutes each day recording precipitation measurements, along with outstanding weather events, and uploading them to the NeRAIN website.
The Nebraska Department of Natural Resources operates the NeRAIN website, while volunteer training and assistance is provided by regional coordinators in each of the Nebraska Natural Resources Districts, or NRDs.
NeRAIN information is updated daily and is available for public access.
The easiest way to get to NeRAIN is just simply to use any search engine for NeRAIN.
Just search
It's
for
the
it.
only thing out there with that name, and it'll take you straight to it. There are also links on the department website, and our stream gauging website is now at nednr.aquaticinformatics.net. And there's a link to NeRAIN right there.
Most of the natural resource districts also have a link to the NeRAIN on their websites too.
The data is also transmitted on a regular basis to the Community Collaborative Rain, Hail, and Snow Network, or COCOROS, an international database for precipitation and weather events.
Rain gauges have been provided using funding by the natural resource districts in Nebraska, the Nebraska Department of Natural Resources, so that's NRDs and DNR, and also the Nebraska Environmental Trust, NET. Lots of acronyms here.
Yes. We're giving you the rundown. Okay, so in your own language, give us a general overview of NeRAIN and your involvement with the program.
NeRAIN has been active since 2004, so we're at 19 years and counting at this point. And we have, to date, on the order of 500 plus people that go read the rain gauge in their yard every single day, or perhaps it's at a school or work location, and they upload that data. We try to get folks to upload as close to 7 a.m. as they're able to, so that it's matching everybody else in the state. And so it reflects the rainfall or snowfall, any sort of precipitation that's happened in the 24 hours since 7 a.m. yesterday.
So what is NeRAIN used for? Like, I know we mentioned COCOROS. Do you want to dive into that and like how the data influences a lot of these different networks and programs?
Sure. Well, I mean, let's start with Nebraska's number one industry is agriculture and everything relating to agricultural production. And so these kinds of records are absolutely very, very valuable, multi-billion-dollar industry in the state. It's also useful for all kinds of downstream products, if you will, where COCOROS includes readings from all over the country, as well as Canada and some of the Caribbean islands. So it's truly an international organization, and all the data is collected in a very similar manner using a very simple 4-inch diameter plastic rain gauge that's really easy to read and very accurate. The data is used by insurance folks looking at hail damage and things like that. It's used in the moment by weather forecasters. There's an option if you're in the middle of a big thunderstorm to upload that information, and the various National Weather Service offices are watching for that at all times. And when we say it's periodically uploaded to COCOROS, we mean many times a day. So they hit our website and download any information that's come in since the last time they downloaded.
That's awesome. I didn't know that during like major storms you could submit, the precipitation and be like, oh my gosh, look at me, look at my area.
Yeah, and we have two different forms that you can fill out. One is specific to hail, but the other one is for any sort of intense weather event. And we're looking for wind damage, thunderstorm activity, that sort of thing.
Oh my gosh, I feel like you told Dehvynne and I once about somebody submitting a report on hail, and it was, what'd you say? I want to say like softball size or something.
We've gotten all kinds of interesting reports. The interesting thing for me, though, is that so many people are intimidated by the hail report, and we try to make it very simple with pull-down menus. And so they'll often just include the word hail in their comments for their regular rainfall. The story I think you're talking about actually happened quite close to Lincoln. Some actual friends of my kids, actually, so I know these people, had spent considerable time and effort rebuilding a fifth-wheel trailer. They were living in the Denver area at the time. They came back to visit the parents near Lincoln on the maiden voyage. And when the storm had passed over, they had 6-inch holes in the floor of that trailer. So
my
it did not slow down
gosh.
coming through the roof of the RV.
That is
Nightmare.
so scary.
Hail can be very, very damaging. I mean, velocities are like bullets, so it's more like a cannonball than a softball, if you will.
Yeah, and if it's in the floor, like, where do you hide? You can't.
Yeah, that's why I don't know. There was one time I was on UNL's campus and it was like tiny hills and I like still ran and hid. I can't even imagine. I'd probably be screaming down the road if I saw that coming
I would
down.
crawl in a sewer.
So speaking of like measurements of hail and stuff, is anything fact checked, or like what is the process of determining whether or not like people's data that they input is accurate? What's your process?
Sure, it starts with training. And as I said, the rain gauge is quite easy to read because it takes 4-inch diameter and it funnels it down to something around an inch in size. It's slightly smaller. And so 1 inch of rain is more like a 10-inch column of water. So you can easily read it, and we train folks how to read that accurately. Beyond that, we find that if you stay in practice, it's going to be more accurate. So we are always asking our folks to check the gauge and upload the data every day. So if they're in practice, that helps. Beyond that, we do not do a lot of fact checking on the NeRAIN website. If we see anything unusual, we'll go ahead and call it out, talk to the volunteer and say, hey, I think maybe, for example, you substituted inches of snow instead of inches of the water equivalent. And so we do some of that fact checking. But then something very similar happens when the data gets to CocoRa's. And so we get reports on a regular basis of things that stand out, and they just don't look quite right compared with readings that they get nearby. There's 2 errors that we specifically train our volunteers to watch for, and the first error is a decimal point error, and so they mean to submit that they had a 1/2 inch of rain. Instead, they submit 5 inches. There's a big difference between a 1/2 inch rain and 5 inches of rain. That's the decimal error. Yeah, and the second error is a date error. And it's real common, especially if you wait until after the weekend and fill it out when you get to your computer at work, for example, and you remember that your picnic got ruined on Saturday. Well, that data does not go on Saturday. Saturday reflects the 24 hours, which goes back to Friday morning. Mm-hmm. So that data needs to go on Sunday. Mm-hmm. So Saturday afternoon picnic means you would have read the gauge Sunday morning and gotten whatever the reading was.
So you talked about an example of snow melt and collecting those measurements. Do you want to dive into that a little bit more on how you collect that data for snow and hail situations?
There are 4 numbers that we're interested in related to snow. And even though it's not quite as meaningful, people are always interested in how many inches of snow did we get. And you want to know 2 things there. First of all, how much is the new snow and how much is the snow pack? So the new snow, you would go out with a shovel or a spatula or something and a ruler. And you simply scrape away the snow where you've had new snow, but you shoveled that snow, for like on your sidewalk, for example, and that it was clear before the storm that you're measuring it from. And so you just get a nice clean edge to it and then measure how thick it is with the ruler. And so that might be 1 inch, it might be 6 inches in a very large snowstorm, and hopefully it's not in terms of feet, which it can happen. And then the second is how thick is the snowpack, so that would include prior snowfalls, and so you try to go out and find a typical place in your yard where you haven't shoveled and where you haven't dumped snow on top of it. And you do the same thing. You scrape away just enough that you can put the ruler down and measure how many inches of snow is your snowpack. So that's interesting. Perhaps it has application in terms of how easy it is to drive through, for example. But what is really interesting from a flood prevention point of view or a flood mitigation point of view or a drought point of view is what's the water equivalent in it. First thing is how much precipitation actually landed in your rain gauge. Now, mind you, the backstory here is that we urge people to bring in that inner cylinder that's in that rain gauge when it starts to freeze at night, because it will generally break if it goes through a freeze-thaw cycle. So we, at this point, would have only an open 4-inch tube, and so whatever collected in there is what we're interested in. And so folks are trained to bring that 4-inch tube inside the house where you've got running water, and you fill your graduated cylinder, the small cylinder, nearly full of water. You write down how much it is, so it's going to be 0.95, 0.98 inches of water. You pour it into the big tube where your snow is, and you melt it down. If it doesn't completely melt, you get another tube full of water, and you pour it in, and you write that down. When it's all melted, you pour it all back into the graduated cylinder, and if you put in, say, 2 cylinders full into your big tube, then you might take 3 cylinders out or whatever, and again, you write it all down. And you find after all that work, the water equivalent
is not a lot.
Oh no, it's far less than you were hoping it was. For the snowpack, it's a very similar manner of measuring it, but you want to go out again in your yard where you haven't shoveled or anything, and you want to find out what is the water equivalent in that snowpack. And you do that by turning your big tube over and plunging it into the snowpack, and then using a spatula or piece of cardboard or something to try to pick up an intact core of that snowpack. And you take that in the house, and again, you melt it down by pouring in water and then pour it out, measuring it as you go. And you'll often find, because the snowpack has probably gone through a few freeze-thaw cycles, it's actually got a much higher water content in it. The reason the snowpack is very interesting, especially to flood prediction folks and so on, is the worst that can happen, and this was typical in the 2019 flooding that we had in northern and eastern Nebraska, and that is a rainfall on top of a snowpack that has quite a bit of water, especially if the ground is saturated or frozen, because then it's all going to run off, and it's going to run off right now. So those snowpack values are valuable. And so it's not really the individual snowfalls that are of real interest in that situation, but it's nice if we can get our volunteers to go out once a week and measure that snowpack water equivalent, say every Monday, for example, or whatever day works for them.
That's really interesting.
You talked about hail, too.
Yeah. Is it the same kind of process? You gather, or whatever hail's
measure
in
the
there?
diameter of hail, or how does that work?
Yeah, hail is really frustrating in this business because it often happens during the summer when you've got both the funnel top on top of your big cylinder as well as your smaller cylinder inside. Hail will break those things. So
Oh, gosh.
yeah, we have to replace them for folks if they've broken in a hailstorm. The other thing is the hail bounces right out of the funnel. So we know that if there's hail, we probably have missed quite a bit of the precipitation that fell. There may be an actual inch or two that came down as hailstones, and it all bounced right out of right out of the cylinder. So that's frustrating for me. But in terms of what it was like, what was damaged, the weather folks, the researchers and so on, just cannot get enough information. They want to know if it's hard and very shiny, or if it's got rough edges on it. Is it slushy?
Cloudy, and how big
Is
it
it
is. Yeah,
cloudy or clear?
there's so many things that you can write down about hail. I had no idea.
Yes.
Huh, it's weird. It's
So-
like shoes.
What
Yeah.
kind of hail are we getting today?
Yeah. So on our website, we have pull-down menus for typical size, the large size, the small size, and if we just get the typical size, that's super helpful. And we try to relate it to things that people can relate it to instead of just millimeters or inches. So we relate it to a size of a quarter or a pea or, what have you.
Softball.
Softball, yeah, cannonball, yeah. So, we try to get a feel for how widespread the sizing is. It's also nice to know what time of day it was and that sort of thing, so it can be correlated with radar returns, and it can be applied over a much larger area that way. And again, any information our volunteers provide can be super useful.
We kind of said this earlier, but I just wanted to, reiterate that the rain gauges are free if somebody wants to sign up to be the citizen science to record precipitation, correct?
That's correct. And they're available through your local NRD office. You can go to the NeRAIN website. There are 4 main menus. That would be your maps, your reports, data entry, and then a help website. And in the help menu, there's people to contact. So the listing of the local NRD folks is there. And there's a selection for how to get involved, and you can read some background materials, and you can apply to be part of the program there. Once you've done that, you can get together with your local NRD person, and they'll set you up with a free rain gauge.
Besides all the new citizen scientists that are going to be signing up after this podcast, are there any future plans that you have for NeRAIN? Anything in the works, like as far as equipment or where you're trying to hit different parts of the state with more rain gauges, anything like that?
Yeah, there's several pieces there we could talk about. Where the gauges are typically follow population patterns, if you will. So, unfortunately, north central Nebraska, we could use a couple hundred more gauges. It's much more difficult to get people involved there. Part of it tends to be what kind of ground there is, and the fact that there are fewer people there, because it tends to be more grazing land instead of crops of various kinds, and whatever rain falls helps, and the landowners have a pretty good handle on what the grass is going to be like for their herds. And so we have our highest concentration in the cities and along the major transportation corridors. Having said that, there's no way we can have too many volunteers in any one location. So, for example, in Lincoln and Omaha, we have lots of volunteers, and the difference between their reporting is just truly interesting. We tend to think of rain as being uniform, but we can have a large storm in one part of the city and absolutely nothing on the far side. So that is tremendously interesting to me to see how that works out. It all kind of averages out, across the year, but any one storm can be highly variable. Let's talk about recent changes. About a year ago, I think it was, we started allowing non-standard gauges. So the standard one that we provide, 4-inch diameter, little more than a foot tall, maybe 15 inches tall. But we've had folks who wanted to use some sort of an electronic gauge that might be easier to read, that could connect to the household Wi-Fi system, and you can read the results on your phone or whatever.
Whoa.
Yeah, and so if
That's
folks...
high-tech.
High-tech. If folks want to use that sort of a system, we now allow them to do so. And we don't make any distinction between types of gauges, except that we either have standard gauge, which is the one we've had all along, and non-standard gauge. And there's no shame. In fact, it's pretty cool to see the difference for a particular storm between the two kinds of gauges. But let me point out that CocoRa's only wants to see the standard information. So if you want your information to go to the national or international level and be viewed by the researchers and that sort of thing, just stick with the free rain gauge. And
Don't spend the money on the
We
Wi-Fi
will not
one.
supply you with a Wi-Fi enabled rain gauge.
yeah. So, it allows people a little more choice, if you will. So I think that's really kind of neat. As far as outreach goes, we're starting a monthly newsletter that we'll be getting out to remind folks about the program and that sort of thing. But
How do you get on that list?
if you sign up with any sort of an account at NeRAIN, you will be on the list.
You're already there.
So if you're thinking about it and you're not for sure,
This is your call to duty.
yeah.
That's correct. That's correct. And I think I honestly don't know. I think there's various, you guys would know better than me, locations where you can sign up to get on department email lists. And I know there's others that, other places where you can sign up on our DNR website.
Yeah, if you go to our DNR website, there's a link that says, like, subscribe to news and information, and there's a link for NeRAIN that you can go. Or, you can go through your NRDs or just the NeRAIN website.
You can get to that new real-time water website by going to nednr.aquaticinformatics.net, and there are lots of links and dashboards and help material, and there will be more appearing there all the time. And if you have any questions on the new website or on NeRAIN, feel free to get in touch with me. I'm on that list of people to contact that I described back at NeRAIN. So you go to the help section, people to contact. I'm there at the bottom of the page as statewide coordinator. You can just shoot me an email at james.williams@nebraska.gov regarding stream gauging or NeRAIN.
Thank you for joining us, Jim. Of course, we'll have you back. We are focusing on data this year, so you're one of our people.
Special guests.
Peeps. Yeah.
Yeah, you're one of our peeps.
It's good to be here.
All right. Thanks, guys. I think
Break time's over.
yeah.